tropical storm conditions up and down much of Florida's Atlantic coastline over the last several hours. Do want to point out, it does look like this ragged inner core has broadened a little bit just over the last hour or so as we've been watching it now well into radar range. Normally, you would say that's a good thing because that would indicate maybe a weakening of the system, but overall, this is a different go-around this time because we're late in the season. This storm has origins as a subtropical system, meaning its structure wasn't purely tropical at first, and because of it, we've got this gigantic wind field that persists. Those are tropical storm force winds as analyzed by forecast models, the computer models, that extend out almost 500 miles off to the north of the center of circulation. It is not a symmetrical storm. You can see that yellow here, at least with respect to where the low-level center is. It's all on the northern half, the northern hemisphere of this system. You do see where the hurricane gusts are. Those are expected to move onshore just after midnight tonight along Florida's Treasure Coast. That's where we'll see the worst of the weather. Just off to the north of wherever that center moves ashore is likely where we'll see the greatest surge. But because the wind field of this is so broad, you also see this perpendicular direction of the wind to much of the Atlantic coastline of Florida, also up into Georgia and the Carolinas. That's why the surge threat is significant over such a broad geographical area all the way up across much of the southeast. We're expecting significant water rise. We've already seen problems with beach erosion and coastal flooding, particularly right there, Daytona Beach shores. We checked in with Katie Garner earlier. The issue is we still have another at least 24 hours or so of this because we've got the onshore flow. This is tomorrow afternoon. Look at the timestamp here. That's 1 p.m. Eastern time, so early afternoon. You still have this significant onshore component. You also have what could be a circulation emerging into the northeastern Gulf of Mexico. We know that this is an area that's geographically favored, unfortunately, for significant surge. You've got an onshore flow for areas along, likely just north of Tampa Bay and up into the Big Bend region. This is shallow shelf waters of the Gulf of Mexico, and you also have the Big Bend, which is shaped like a catcher's mitt. You can get a surge that piles up there very quickly. We saw that happen just a couple years back with Tropical Storm Eta. That was late into the season. That was a November storm, and we had problems with coastal flooding in these areas. We'll be watching for that, particularly through the day tomorrow. This is 9 p.m. now tomorrow evening. You still have that area of tropical storm force winds just finding its way up across the Florida-Georgia line. So this is a long duration event, and that's why the category of this, be it a high-end tropical storm, low-end category 1, the structure of this storm system was much more important. Because of that, it's going to be broadly impactful. We have storm surge warnings on both coasts of Florida. That's a scenario where you can only see that when you have a very broad system. It brings me back to Irma. Obviously, these are two very different storms, not even close to the intensity with Nicole what we had with Irma, but that was a scenario where you had hurricane conditions occurring simultaneously on both coasts. I do think there's a period of time overnight tonight or tomorrow where we get tropical storm force or tropical storm conditions occurring simultaneously on both coasts. And because of that, we've got the surge concerns on both coasts and points north, up into places like coastal Georgia and the Carolinas. That's where we could see up into the low country some problems with coastal flooding. We haven't even talked about the astronomical effects with this. We had a full moon last night. These were some of the highest astronomical tides of the entire year, and that is why this is such a poorly timed late season storm system, exaggerating those coastal effects because the water is so high just based on the position of the moon right now. So this is the Fox model projecting tomorrow afternoon. Of course, we've had surge on this side the entire time. As you see that center of circulation perhaps emerging out into the northern Gulf of Mexico, the flow turns onshore now in the Gulf side, and that's what could quickly kick up a surge over on the Gulf Coast of Florida. We're going to have to watch for that tonight, and particularly through the day tomorrow, as this broadly impactful storm system, and we're just starting to see conditions deteriorating along the Atlantic coastline. Long way to go with this one. Nick?
All right, Ian, well, that rain from Nicole is increasing the threat of flash flooding along Florida's east coast right through Friday. Let's take you up to Jacksonville, Florida, as we've got a temperature of 66. The rain is not falling all that heavily right now, but you can tell it's certainly damp there, and it does look like the wind is impacting the camera a little bit there, kind of moving it back and forth as the wind is gusting at about 13 miles per hour. Jacksonville is some 300 miles from the center of the storm, but we're already, and again, this just goes to show you how wide the wind field is around Nicole. We've already seen a tropical storm force wind gust there right along Jacksonville Beach at about 50 miles per hour. And this is going to be the case as we go up and down the coastline, not just in Florida, but up into the Georgia and Carolina coastlines as we go through time here. This wind field is massive, and so it's going to have a big impact on much real estate here up and down the East Coast. Right now, Palm Bay, Port St. Lucie, Jupiter, West Palm Beach, getting some rain. You see the center of circulation here with Nicole is just hours away from making landfall, and once that happens, we're going to continue to see that storm surge just increasing and getting worse. Meanwhile, in Orlando, Florida, they've seen over 1.5 inches of rain. The wind is gusting at about 15 miles per hour. As you take a peek at the traffic, it looks like everything moving along just fine right now in Orlando, but as we go through time, this is another location that is under that flood watch, and we could definitely see some puddling and ponding on the roadways with 3 to 5 inches of rain expected, and not to mention very, very gusty winds, hurricane force as we go into tomorrow morning, and tropical storm force through the rest of the day. Here is your next 12 hours there in Orlando, and no surprise here, Bridget. Cloudy, temperatures holding steady, plenty of rain, and you can see gusts of wind at 40 and 50 miles per hour here right through 9 a.m. So it's certainly going to be active here as we go through the next half of the day or so.
And you know, some of those wind gusts already starting to verify in some of these isolated spots. This is a look out in Daytona Beach. That's where conditions are getting rather dangerous for many of these areas. This is a look out there right now. Those wind gusts peaking now up to 55 miles per hour. You can see that flagpole out there blowing in the wind. Currently no flag on there. If it was, the wind just tore it off. Not only that, we see gusty winds. It looks like we have some white caps out there also on the ocean. Overall, that is only going to push it inland more through the next several hours. Not all about the wind speed, that's a big factor, but it's just how the wind is interacting with the coastline. We are seeing these winds out of the northeast, so that's that big time push onshore. When we see that big push onshore, we also see that big pull out as the waves move back. Overall, that's very dangerous. With this, we likely are going to see the potential of some of that coastal flooding in many of these areas. Not only to mention that, we think back a couple of months now to Hurricane Ian that made landfall on the west side, but it worked up to the north close to Orlando. This is where they saw pretty extensive flooding in some of these spots, so conditions could be worsening.